Hello students, Mr. Young here. Welcome to Chapter 20, Lesson 3. It is called An Age of Business, and this lesson is very much a sort of Economics 101 type lesson. Let's talk about it, shall we? So today's lesson is a lesson on big business. At least that's how it starts. It really seeks to let you know just enough business to understand the history of big business in the United States. What's good about this lesson is that all the information on business is still pertinent today. So pay attention, because this stuff will be useful when you learn more history or have to go to, Economics 101 someday. Good stuff to know. Dollar bill, y'all. Alright, so we're about to learn about a bunch of dudes who got insanely rich. How did they do it? Well, they were ambitious, sometimes cutthroat, and had access to the resources and the freedom to thrive. For example, no one really cared about the oil quite literally seeping from the ground in western Pennsylvania. Edwin L. Drake cared, and even though people said he was crazy, he dug wells looking for more oil. In 1859, he dug his first well in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Little did he know he would blaze the trail for the multi-million-dollar oil industry, now multi-billion, maybe multi-trillion dollars. And it all started with one guy, and they said he was crazy. A lot of times people that are insanely rich start out with people saying, "You're crazy." A little heads up for you there. There it is. Alright, now we're going to talk about a very important thing called the factors of production. So in the late 1800s, transportation, technology, and vast natural resources continued the sort of United States push away from agriculture and towards industry. Among these resources is what is called the factors of production. The factors of production are land, labor, and capital, which are described below. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as the 4 factors of production, with the last one being entrepreneurs. But let's talk about specifically the first 3, land, labor, and capital. What are they? Look at this nice graphic here. Land is literally land and natural resources. So, like it says here, land includes the gifts of nature or natural resources not created by human effort. So, timber, grass, oil, granite, rocks, water, these are all part of land. Labor includes people with all their efforts and abilities. So like me, would be an example of labor. I teach, that's what I do. Or like a welder or a salesman. The people that do the work is the labor. Capital is a little more obtuse. It includes the tools, equipment, and factories used in production. So a jelly bean factory with all the equipment would be capital. My $1 million inheritance, I wish, from my, rich Aunt Gertrude would be capital. It's basically tools, equipment, factories, money, things like that. So that's land, labor, capital. Entrepreneurs, this is a little extra because it's not in your lesson, are the individuals who start a new business or bring a product to a market. So entrepreneurs we'll talk about today would be like Andrew Carnegie and John Rockefeller. These would be the entrepreneurs, yeah. So, the USA had plenty of not only land, but natural resources like fossil fuels, metals, timber, water, etc. The population had more than doubled between 1960 and 1900. There's your labor. And then there's capital. Machinery and technology was on the rise, as was the disposable income, the money, needed to create more wealth. So we have a rising amount of land, labor, and capital. It basically sets a good environment for your sort of first mega millionaires. Finding capital. After the Civil War, there was a lot of growth and industrialization. We've talked about that. To create something from nothing, though, especially a factory, you need a lot of money. Often more money than an entrepreneur, or someone who starts a business, has at their disposal. One way to gain the funds, the money or capital needed to start a business or a factory, was to become a corporation. A corporation is a business with many owners. parts of ownership are sold and the money gained is used to start the business. These parts of ownership are called stock. You may have heard of it, like the stock market. So the part owners of a business, the ones that have purchased the stock, are called shareholders because they share a portion of the business. Now, what incentive is for you to buy stock? Well, if the business you bought stocks for does well and it makes a profit, you may receive a share of that profit called a dividend. Now, corporations fueled the growth of industry in the late 1800s. Railroads were actually the first business to incorporate, but other businesses soon followed. So that's how it's going. It's kind of like a joint stock company that we learned about before. They would, or did we learn about that in world studies? So if you had me in 7th grade, you would have learned about it. Basically, Mr. Yund doesn't have enough money to build my own factory from scratch, so I sell shares called stock to you, my classmates there. Now you own the business as well. I own it. Whoever buys a stock or a share of stock owns it. Now we're all the owners, and the money that I made by selling you that stock, that part ownership, is what I use to create the factory. So, yep, that is a corporation. Now let's talk about the growth of oil and steel. So when Edwin Drake struck oil, remember at the top of the lesson, in 1859 he started an oil rush much like a gold rush. People rushed to western Pennsylvania and then West Virginia to drill for oil. Towns like Oil City were founded. John D. Rockefeller and 4 partners built an oil refinery in Ohio. Now, a refinery is a little different in that it takes the crude oil taken from the ground, literally a product taken from the ground, and then they refine it into a product that we can use. For example, you can't just take oil out of the ground and put it in your car or your lawnmower. It has to go through a refining process to purify it, to make it into whatever product we want. Plastics are made of oil. Your engine oil is made of oil, but it's different than, say, gasoline, which is more refined. So it refines it into something you can use. Where were we? All right, yes, Rockefeller. He created an oil refinery in Ohio. People were pulling out of this oil, but there wasn't a lot that could be done with it until it was refined, so he hopped in on the refining process. In 1870, Rockefeller organized what was called the Standard Oil Company, and then he set out to dominate the oil industry. Rockefeller used what is called horizontal integration. This is fancy talk meaning he purchased or took control by some means all of his competitors, these being the other oil refineries. He pressured customers not to do business with these other refineries. He also managed to get great rates from the railroads. We talked about things like rebates. In 1882, he formed a trust, which means he had the same small group of people, called a board of trustees, managing multiple oil companies. Basically, Standard Oil would purchase stock or parts of ownership of competing oil companies, gaining partial ownership. In this way, Rockefeller was able to create a monopoly of the oil refining industry. A monopoly means total control of an entire industry. So if Mr. Yun had a monopoly on jelly beans, that means all jelly beans created in the world would be basically coming from my jelly bean factories. So in the case of Rockefeller, he was able to take at least partial control of every oil refinery and basically formed a monopoly. So if oil was being refined, it was being refined by John D. Rockefeller and his Standard Oil Trust. He used business wizardry to basically take control of every oil refinery. So yeah, monopolies are bad now. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the lesson. Let's switch gears to sort of a Pittsburgh historical celebrity, Andrew Carnegie. So the steel industry also boomed in this era of big business. Steel was needed for train tracks, bridges, and other manufacturing. 2 new processes, the Bessemer process and the open hearth process, made strong and affordable steel easy to manufacture. Before this, it was basically a giant pain in the butt to make steel. So 2 new processes, new technology makes it much easier. As a result, steel mills opened in places like Cleveland, Ohio, Chicago, and Birmingham, Alabama. Pittsburgh became the center of steel production in the nation. Think about all the rivers you have here. You know, you need those to make the steel. So, Andrew Carnegie became a Goliath in the steel industry. The son of a Scottish immigrant, Carnegie started as a telegraph operator for the Pennsylvania Railroad. He worked his way up to manager of the whole railroad. Then he realized that there was a giant market for steel, so he opened up his own steel mill in Pittsburgh. By 1910, Carnegie dominated the steel industry by means of vertical integration. This means he owned the entire process front to back. So he wasn't buying anything from anyone. He owned the mines that produced the iron needed to make the steel, as well as the coal mines needed to fuel the steel mills. He owned his own transportation, so his own trucks were moving his steel. By owning the entire process, Carnegie could basically charge lower rates than his competitors, and they just couldn't match his prices. By 1900, his company made 1/3 of the entire nation's steel. Now, guys like Rockefeller and Carnegie had so much money that they started to spend it on public projects for the good of the people. The reasons are varied, but some really thought it was their moral obligation as super rich people to use their wealth to help people out. They founded schools, libraries, theaters, and all kinds of things like that. Carnegie, for example, donated $350 million to various organizations. Just gave it away. Carnegie Hall in New York City was paid for by Carnegie. Rockefeller had libraries built, as well as the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. Here's Carnegie Hall. Super nice, right? Now, towards the end of the 1800s, corporations were becoming immensely powerful. In New Jersey, they actually facilitated the growth of monopolies by allowing holding companies. A holding company gains power over multiple corporations by buying stocks. Other states made mergers easier, or one company combining with other companies. Mergers happen in the news all the time, like, for example, if Netflix bought Hulu, that would be a merger. They're usually familiar, they're sort of comparative businesses combining. Like if one car company buys another car company, they might merge. The problem with one company cornering a market and forming a monopoly is that with little competition, there's no reason to improve the product, and they can basically charge whatever they want. In 1890, Congress passed what was called the Sherman Antitrust Act, which made trusts and monopolies illegal. The problem was the law initially didn't have any teeth, so basically no room for enforcement, and it did little to curb the growing power of corporations. So this is important. Let's go back to the jelly bean example. If Mr. Yund owns every jelly bean factory on the face of the planet, and I have no competition, there's no reason for me to make any newer or better jelly beans, and I will keep selling you the same 3 flavors of jelly beans forever. Because there's no competition, there's no reason for me to improve my product, because I'm the only one you can buy jelly beans from. Now, if there's a new jelly bean people that come out, if I have a competitor and they're coming out with a new flavor every month, everyone's going to buy that jelly bean, so I need to make better jelly beans as well. But with no competition, there's no reason to do that. Plus, if I'm the only jelly bean company, I can charge you crazy prices for my jelly beans because I'm the only way you're going to get jelly beans. If you want jelly beans, you got to buy them from me so I can charge what I want. Whereas opposed, if there was another jelly bean company and they had low prices, then you would just buy their jelly beans. It's sort of the free hand of economics. And when you don't have any competition, there's nothing like it messes up the supply and demand curve. So that's why monopolies are bad. With no competition, a company can charge what they want and they don't really innovate. It'd be like if there was no Android, then iPhone and Android wouldn't be competing to make their products better. It's that competition that drives that innovation and those updates and the new phone, like the iPhone 10 is out now. Regardless, I think you get my point. We're at 14:25. You have a little quiz on the next page. And I think that's really all I wanted to talk about. There's some complicated stuff in here. If you have any questions, just let me know. Nothing crazy on the quiz, though. Pretty basic. That's it. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a great day.